Hi again. So we keep working on this breakout game, which is based on the old popcorn game, and we started looking into physics. So we created this ball using the circuit sprite, and we talked about using the rigid body and the collider in order to enable an actual physics behavior. Also, the last thing we learned about was a physics material, like the ball material, and we placed it over the rigid body 2D, which is the physics body, which has all the attributes of the physical object that the object needs. For example, for this material, we gave it a bounciness of 1 and friction of 0. So bounciness of 1 makes it jump. Okay, friction of 0 will make it slide. But we'll look on friction maybe later. Let's start with something else. So this ball is jumping, keep going back to, I think, about the same height, but we want to do a different kind of movement. But why? The thing is, for many games like Angry Birds and other physics games, gravity is useful. But for our game, we actually want the world to have no gravity down and still have all the physical force that works to all the other directions. Okay, because we want to make this ball move and hit bricks, but we want to do it in a certain way. For example, this ball is actually getting higher. So this ball, every time it hits something, okay, it jumps up, but the gravity pulls it down. And we don't want gravity to affect it. We want the movement of the ball to be totally predictable. So how can we do that? So first of all, the same way we did before with the pad, let's just remove the gravity for the ball. So I'll go for the ball, and I'll look for a rigid body, and in the rigid body I want the gravity scale, and the gravity scale is currently 1. Now let's just have a look how it will act if we change it to 0.1. Okay, and 0.1. Okay, so gravity is still working, but it's really, really slow. Okay, and also it kind of loses momentum, right? Because it's really, really slow. So if we turn it totally to 0, and I'll enter, okay, then stops. Now, interesting thing, it kept moving down because it has a velocity of going down. Velocity is the power of movement in a certain direction. So it has the velocity of going down until it stops. Now, we're going to use the exact same thing, the velocity, to make this ball move. And how would we do that? So we would like to work using the rigid body. To work with the rigid body, we have to have access for it. So we have here the pad, and we actually want to work with the ball. We don't have a script for the ball yet, so let's go back to Unity and make sure we have a ball script. So I'll add component, I'll start to write down ball, and doesn't find anything, so it suggested a new script. Once I press it, it gives the name I listed, the ball, and I create an add, which means it will also create the script and add it to the object. So I do expect it to see it here on the inspector as a new component. So I'll do create an add, and we got a script here, ball, and it has nothing in it, right? I mean, it doesn't have any other like variable or anything else. For example, for the pad, okay, when we look at the pad, we have here the script of the pad, we have the speed x, okay, moving from side to side, the direction -1, and the limit x. The direction is not useful for us now because we're not auto moving it, but we used it at the beginning to make it start moving to a certain direction when we did the auto movement. Anyway, let's go back to the ball. So the ball now has a script, so we can start working on it. And this is a good opportunity to remember that when we create a new script, we create a ball, which is a mono behavior. We'll talk about this, about inheritance later. But this is basically this is kind of a Unity object which has a transform and everything else. And part of it is giving us the ability to get its component. You remember we have the component that we see in the inspector, and we use the transform. Now we're going to handle and use other components. So for example, remember we added the rigid body 2D, okay? And I usually call it by short RB. And now we have a variable which you see is great because it is not used yet. Now, how can we use it? first of all, we have to initiate it. We have to make it point to the actual rigid body 2D component of the object. In order to do that, we'll have to use some functionality that we have because we use the mono behavior. Okay, we use the ball, which is a mono behavior, which is an Unity object. So we'll do it on the start, so we'll have the ability to use it later, and we'll do it like this. So it's with rigid body equals the function get component. Now get component, you see here two options. We're using this one with the angle brackets, and okay, get component, and it's like this. Now, what do we need? You see it already has an arrow here, and what he wants is us to tell it what kind of component do you need. So, and you see here, when I put my mouse around on the get component, we said that there is a question mark inside the angle bracket. So what do we need here? We actually want to tell it which component do we want. Okay, we might, we might have several components like the script, like the sprite renderer, and we do have the rigid body 2D. So let's just tell it rigid body 2D. So in Unity, and I believe in C#, we have more than a few functions and functionality that use these angle brackets to tell the compiler, to tell the code, to tell the computer exactly what kind of object we want to work with this function. So in this case, we want the rigid body 2D, and the get component will return us, now that we put the mouse over it, it will return a rigid 2D body. Now once we have it, we can do something with it. So we talked about velocity. So the velocity is the force. It's like a vector that tells us the force of the force that is activated on the object in this moment. It's a bit confusing though, because force is like when I push something. Okay, when I push something, I activate force on that thing. If I push a ball and it starts rolling over, then I use my force and I push the ball and I make it move forward. What I'm changing is the velocity of the ball. The ball has a velocity. When it doesn't move, he'll maybe have a zero velocity, but usually has the gravity. Okay, and he's just stopped by the surface, by the floor or by a table. But when I push it, I put a force and I actually change its velocity. It's you can think about the velocity like an internal, the current internal force. So let's do that. I'll start very simple. I say rigid body dot and set velocity, I believe, or velocity. Yeah, velocity, and it's vector 2D, and it's get and set. Now the vector 2D, it's like a point, and we talk about the position, which is also a vector. And let's do it like this: new vector 2, and we can give it an x and y. Okay, there are two constructors here. This with nothing, and we can give it an x and y. So let's start with something really simple. I put 0 on the x and 1 on the y. Okay, I put the F for it to be certain this is a float. I'll save this. Let's just run the game. So I'll go back to Unity. And when I press start, it goes to the start method of the ball. Okay, and it's got the velocity up, but it still got the gravity down. So it got the velocity up, but the gravity kept changing it. The gravity force kept changing it and make it move down. Okay, but let's have a look on that. So here's the rigid body, and we have gravity scale 0.1. Now, if we change it to 0, then there will be no force starting, and the velocity will just, there will not be any force of gravity that pulling it down, and now we have only velocity that takes it up. That's great. So we did this by putting a 0 and 1. Now, you know what? Let's do it a bit easier for us to test and learn from. So I'll just put here public, and I'll call it, and it will be a vector 2, and it will be initial velocity. Okay, and I won't give it any value here, but I will use it here. So I'll set the rigid body velocity to the initial velocity. This gives me the opportunity and the ability to change the velocity through Unity. So I'll go back to Unity, and look, it's very nice. We have the velocity and we have the x and the y. So we started with 0, 1. Let's start with 0, minus 1. Okay, now look here. When I start it, okay, so it's going down, and it stopped because it hit the pad, and the pad does not move. Now, if I move the pad, it's still in the same place because when it collided, the physics changed the velocity. That's interesting, right? So let me stop that, and let's okay, let's change the velocity again. But you know what? I don't want it every time that I change the velocity, I have to rerun the program. Okay, and when we want to develop a game or anything, we want to be able to do it in rapid pace and test it again and again in really fast pace to solve the problem easier, to get to the solution we want, to make things work the way we want. So how can we do that? So I want to be able to test different velocity really, really fast. So instead of like, sorry, this is not the right one. Leave. Okay, let's go back to the code of the ball. Okay, so I know why. So I open a Rider, which is a different editor. So we have here the ball and the code in Visual Studio Code, and the reason I work with Visual Studio is because this is available with Unity. So I want to be able to change the velocity all the time. So let me just, first of all, I want to change this. I'll right click it and go to rename. Okay, and I call it I just call it next vel, which is a shortcut for next velocity. And again, will begin by using it, and I'll do apply. But I want the ability to change it all the time. So I'll do it with update, and I'll do if input dot get key down, get key down. We have this before, and I'll use the key code, and I'll use a space, which is a short for spacebar, or just, you know, like typing space. And in this case, I will just change the velocity. Okay, so now if I change the velocity from the inspector, I can actually make the ball move in a different direction while using it. So let me go and start this. I'll save it. I'll go back to Unity. Okay, and now it's 0, 0. We change it. It's called next vel. And now I'll change it. You know what? Let's just do X. We'll put it at 0.5. And I'll start it, and it just start moving to 0.5. Now let me change it to minus and press here space, and it will start moving in the other direction. And if I'll add here 1 and press space again, okay, so it's going up. So you see there are a lot of ways here to control the velocity using space, and we can actually understand better how it works. Okay, I'm going to stop now. We're going to continue with the physics in the next video, but we already learned how to use rigid body and velocity to control movement of an object. And in the next lesson, we'll understand better what does it mean, the x and the y in the velocity. And we talk about another thing really important about physics, which is a vector magnitude, which is like the force of the vector, the length, the side of the vector. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you in the next video.